So there we are. I think we're live now. Sorry, my voice obviously goes away right in the second that we're going live. But while folks are trickling in from the previous session on service design and UX research, I'd like to welcome everyone to this discussion on social innovation and social justice. I'm very excited to have you all here, fantastic panelists, and thanks again for coming out virtually today to speak. And for those of you who don't know me, probably most of the audience, I'm Norbert. I run MindSpark's marketing, branding, and communications. And it's an honor to host this panel today as an expat who have lived in many countries and as a member of the LGBTQ plus collective. I think both of those things are unfortunately things that make me prone to having to deal with bias and microaggressions. I find it super important to talk about diversity, inclusivity, and equity. And as I said, I'm very honored to host this panel today. But since it's not my time to speak, I would like to turn over the mic to our wonderful panelists. We have with us Sue from Google, Cindy from Verizon, Jarin, who's a senior healthcare designer, and Nico from Twitter. So before we dive into the discussion itself, I would like to ask everyone to introduce yourselves and just tell me a few things about your background. Sue, would you like to go first?
Yeah, sure. My name is Sue. I'm the senior interaction designer at Google. So I'm currently on the Fuchsia team and also support the Flutter framework for developers experience. Nice to meet everyone.
Great. Cindy?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Cindy Jung. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently in the Chicagoland area, and I sit on the traditional land of the nations of the Council of Three Fires. I am the head of product inclusion at Verizon Media, so I focus on making product development lifecycle more inclusive, both the people building products and then also for the people using the products. And I also, as a passion project, I'm a director at Gold House, which is a nonprofit collective that is focused on accelerating representation and success of the Asian and Pacific Islander community.
Great. Jarin?
Hello, everyone. I'm Jarin. I'm a healthcare designer, service designer, and I've done that in a lot of contexts, from nonprofits to the government, and now I work for a big digital startup. And my passion project is I'm starting a reparations distribution and fund, so that's pretty fun too.
Oh, wow. That sounds like fun and unusual. Nico?
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Nico Rosenstone. My pronouns are he and him. For a visual description, I am a light-skinned man with brown hair and brown eyes and brown glasses. And I'm wearing a V-neck, which is kind of maroonish. And my background is my living room with some pictures of my family as well. I am a senior business partner at IND business partner at Twitter. I am in week 6, so I'm relatively new there, but learning a lot. Really excited to have this conversation. Prior to being at Twitter, I was a consultant, mostly in tech in the DEI space, really looking at redistribution of power and equity and creating spaces where everyone can belong and contribute fully. So very excited to be here. Thanks again to everyone tuning in and looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you so much for the round of introductions. Just for the audience, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments. We'll make sure to set apart some time at the end of the panel to answer them. And with that said, my first question, I will pass that right back to Nico, and I would like everyone to answer, obviously. What does social justice mean to you, and how do you define social justice in relation to social innovation? Nico.
Thanks for the question. So, I'll keep it short because I'm curious to hear everyone's answers as well. Social justice to me really is about the equitable distribution of power. So at its best, when we think about innovation, we seek to better the world. And I would argue that we can't necessarily better the world without an awareness and attention to power. So what does that look like? Well, quick example. When white men design facial recognition technology, it doesn't work on people of color, and it doesn't work as well on women. So if the individuals developing a product do not represent all the populations that we seek to innovate for, the product itself just isn't going to work very well.
Yes, very succinct and perfect definition. Jerry, would you want to answer that?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think for me, justice is about righting past wrong, so acknowledging past wrongs and trying to do something to repair it and make sure it doesn't happen again. And I think when you add the social in front of it, it means that we're looking at it from a society level rather than an individual level. So what are wrongs that have happened to the LGBTQ community, to Black communities, to immigrant communities? And how do we provide justice for them? And I think, yeah, that example, even I think Nico's example, you can even take it farther back to just the development of the camera. It wasn't developed to see dark-skinned people. And so you can see that all the way, how that role to what we're doing today.
Right. Cindy, anything to add?
I think that those two answers are really robust, but I think the interesting thing is like when you talk to just kind of the average person about social innovation and social justice, I think they might conflate the two because, they sound alike and it sounds like you're working towards good, which I think both are, but social innovation really needs that social justice lens in order to truly be representative, equitable, and inclusive. So yeah, I agree. I work in product inclusion, so I go out and evangelize all the ways that the way we build products are wrong and how exclusive we are and how that is actually really harmful. And a lot of examples like the camera and algorithmic biases, et cetera, are things that I bring up. I think that we're starting to see a lot of social innovation that is truly like moving the needle forward towards inclusion. Like you see platforms like Be My Eyes, right, which helps people who are blind or have low vision virtually see, and that's great. But then we also had like programs like homeless shelters, which is a social innovation, which is great when you think about it. But then when you really get into it, you're like, no, we're not solving homelessness. We're just creating a space for homeless people to go, right? And I think that's where the justice parts comes in. Like, let's get to the root of the problem. Let's get to like what the systemic issues are. Let's figure out like, how do we level set everything, And I think that coming out of 2020 and seeing the fact that like it took a global pandemic for people to like march in the streets in the US, actually everywhere, to see justice for one person's life shows that like we needed to kind of like burn it all down to like face these problems, right? And I think that that's where social justice will come in. I think social innovation is a great thing. I think there's a lot of wonderful things to say about it. It's an ecosystem that really requires intersectoral cross collaboration, but without this social justice lens, we're never going to move it kind of to that next level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Sue, I know it's going to be hard to top that and add to that, but I don't know if you have any more thoughts or maybe any other examples like the camera that people normally don't think of when it comes to social innovation, social justice, and how everything's coded in a way that we don't even realize.
Yeah, so I really like the analogy that was actually collected from like Werner Meyer and like Daniel Jude and like linking reports as well. So there's a saying that probably people saw on Twitter as well. It's like called like diversity is being invited to the party, inclusion is being a member of the party planning committee, and belonging is dancing like no one is watching. Right, so I really like that analogy. That kind of speaks through like every single human being should have the freedom to live like themselves and feel comfortable without any concern or unnecessary barriers or attentions. Right, so having that kind of situation pretty much is like a meeting where people are. So whenever there's a need, whenever like everybody should have the to be able to live like themselves, right? So if we think of any kind of like innovation or something, it's like okay, what the society, what the community needs right now, it's the things that we should understand more, right? Not necessarily like okay, we have this thing that's so innovative. Is it ready for the community? Is it ready for everyone, or is it actually coming out from the community needs? Right, so sometimes we have to keep the balance and never force anything into someone that it's not appropriate, or all kinds of like other dimensions that we can talk about later as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Cindy, I feel like you have something to say because you're nodding so adamantly. No,
I just agree with everyone.
Yeah,
so.
No, right. No, that's cool. No, I'm actually glad that you mentioned what happened last year, Black Lives Matter, and the movement that came with it. So that's also a nice segue into my next question to you, you all, is how can social innovation be more informed by social justice? Not just informed, but inspired. So how would that go? Nico?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think ultimately it comes back to power. So, to tackle this, we have to be thinking about investing in communities so that we're able to build solutions that work for them. And Sue kind of iterated to this, that, those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. So we should be listening to community leaders and support them and help them grow with their ideas, as opposed to us going in and saying, this is what you need, and this is how we're going to help you fix your problem. And I think if there was more of that interaction, if there was more of us going in with listening and empathy and understanding and helping them build something that they're already building for their community, they're living and breathing the problem, they understand the problem better than anyone, then we might be able to make more progress and put that social justice lens at the forefront instead of, kind of an extracurricular.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Jaren, any thoughts? You're muted. Sorry.
Thank you. Rookie mistake. Yeah, I think the George Floyd events is actually a really great example of the need for things to be embedded. So we had a major event happen and people's opinions sort of changed and people felt guilt and empathy and all sorts of strong emotions. And then as those things waned, the efforts have waned as well for lots of people. And so the reason that social injustice pervades everything is that it's really embedded in everything. And it's really easy to do. You don't have to necessarily buy into it to be a part of it. Like, I accidentally forgot to say my pronouns. And it was a really, really small act of social injustice, right? But that you can see that in lots of larger scales. And so I think for me, in terms of social innovation and bringing that lens, you have to really think of ways to embed social justice into the work that you're doing. So anytime that you're doing research, it is informed by trying to find, able-bodied people versus disabled people. It's looking at the immigrant experience. It's looking at accessibility differences. It's just looking at all the differences all the time, and it's just embedded, and you don't have to think about it, rather than having to rely on one major event or one person coming into your company who's representing those ideals or things like that.
Yeah, I love that. Sue, do you have any follow-up thoughts?
Yeah, I think that Nicole touched on the community, right? And personally, that at Google, what we are doing right now is that instead of having a question, like whenever you have the answer you're looking for and you go to your users, rather than we call like a sweep and poop, that kind of scenario, right? So instead of that kind of infrastructure, we want to actually initiate the research with the community. So the community leaders, they get to decide what are the topics that's important to them. And then we kind of co-learn with their experience and kind of saying, okay, the entire infrastructure and we basically, like if we talk about inclusivity or diversity, we actually invite the community and then giving them the toolkit, train them, and then provide any kind of the toolkits people need, and then having that kind of long-term partnership. So we no longer call people our users, we call them our partners, right? So our partner teaches things that we need to know and what's crucial, what kind of product and services that they need. Then we supply everything that actually like embedded into the community. And it's going to be a long-term solution, but it's actually the most efficient and that will definitely cover all the bases.
Oh, Norbert, now you're on mute.
Sorry, there's just some dogs here barking, so I didn't want to interrupt. Cindy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, my co-speakers are all raising great points that I completely agree with. I think that we need to recognize bias and that it exists in everyone. It doesn't matter how quote unquote diverse you are, you have bias. And so therefore, even when you build with empathy, that comes with bias, right? So it's really important to have representation at the table, people with these actual lived experiences telling you, as Nico said, like what needs to work for themselves or their community. And so I think that social justice also, to Jaren's point, like it's not this big thing where it's like, oh, there's racism and it's like, we got to solve this huge problem. It's like these little everyday acts where you can, start to really influence like how people talk, the languages they use, right? I mean, like one of the things that I really hate is like when people use mental health diagnoses to talk about their bad day, right? Or they're like, oh, I'm so OCD or I'm so like this. And I'm like, well, oh, are you in medication? They're like, no, I'm just like really OCD today. And it's like, no. Like this is a lived experience for somebody. You don't get to just like throw that term around. But so I think there are these like little things that are causing injustice that we need to work on. And then we also need to look at the macro. So it's like very much like a top down and bottom up approach. And I think that's where, the social justice work will really help influence social innovation in that ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And Cindy, you mentioned that it's a systemic issue, and Jerry mentioned that the things are embedded, right? So I would like to turn this discussion into a little bit more of a practical ideation workshop or something on the likes of that. So what best practices have you all found that are working, and what are some of the big obstacles that we need to overcome in relation to social justice and social innovation? Cindy, I can pass the ball right back to you if you want to kick that off. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the biggest obstacles are the fact that it is systemic, right? And it will take continuous education for people to kind of open their eyes. The good thing about the kind of work that I think we all do here is that we work in spaces where people are ignorant to it, not, because of that they're intentionally trying to be ignorant, but a lot of times that you just lack the access to the stories, the history, et cetera. And going back again to 2020 and George Floyd, and even like with all the like Asian hate that was happening, we started to hear about like who the Black and the Asian communities are in America. And I'm sorry, I'm speaking from a US lens just because I myself am an American and I have the most lived experience in that. But just understanding like where these communities fit in history and the fact that we've been here the whole time, the fact that we've contributed, et cetera. And really that started to, I think, help a lot of people that were Black and Asian themselves that maybe didn't care about these issues before, really like understand like through education, oh my gosh, like I have rights to XYZ just as much as whoever, and this system is broken. And so I think it's inspiring that next generation of technologists, of builders, of visionaries to understand that there is this whole history that maybe has been covered up or has been changed or washed out that's super important. So I think education is really important. I think, again, bias mitigation. Everyone needs to recognize they have bias. We need to constantly work. And that's an everyday process. I don't care like who we are, what job we have. We need to confront that every single day. And, just one last thing for me, I think I work in tech again, and I think one of the things that has worked is looking at innovation kind of as how it serves a spectrum. So one of the things that we talk about in accessibility is that, digital curb cut. So like when the ADA introduced curb cuts and sidewalks, they did it for people who were disabled and had to use a wheelchair. But what we saw is that it had a trickle down effect for people who were parents pushing strollers, travelers who were using suitcases, right? And so it was an innovation that helped that was geared to one specific community, but it had a trickle down effect that helped a lot of other people who had maybe situational or temporary issues or disabilities themselves, right? And so I think that's how we need to start thinking about innovation is like, okay, let's solve a problem for a community. Let's figure out what is the innovative solution to that, but let's make sure that is actually accessible for everyone else too, and that it benefits everybody else.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Yeah. Jaren, anything to add?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I love that example too. I think in general, my kind of design philosophy is if you design for the people with the largest challenges, then it'll be easier for everyone else to use it too. And I think in terms of a hurdle and a best practice. I do a lot of work around maternal health, and in the U.S., in the United States, there's a Black maternal health crisis. There's a maternal health crisis in general, but Black birthing people have it way worse. And so I would have lots of different companies that were coming around with different innovations, and they would all talk about that maternal health crisis, and they would talk about the Black experience, and they would have a persona or they would call out that experience, but then they would have nothing where they were actually trying to solve something for the unique needs of Black people. It was just sort of generalized. So they anchored to that as a problem, but then didn't use that as a lens for what they were trying to solve. And so that is both a highlight and a low light, where people see that there are distinctions, but sometimes it can be very scary to design something specifically for Black people. Then that feels wrong sometimes for people. So that's one thing. And I think for me, one thing that came out of that, just through my whole career, I have seen thousands of persona, and 1% of them have Black people. 1% of them have LGBTQ people. Like, they're all the same persona. And so anytime I'm making a user story or I'm making a persona, I use names that look like the names around me in the world. I use Muhammad or Terrell I try and diversify all of the things that I'm doing so that it's embedded in the product up front. And so that's what I try and do. Thank you, Jaren. Nico, what do you think? What's a big hurdle, and what's?
I think this is a great segue, Jared, too, into how we hire and who's present at the table, as Cindy mentioned. At Twitter, we are actively seeking to hire people that represent the product that we're seeking to build. So if we don't have individuals who are building a product that look like and represent the communities that are using our product, we're not going to be able to build something that works for them. And that entails, and I've seen this in my work as a consultant, entails us rethinking about who gets hired, what those practices look like, what biases exist in the actual practices themselves. And it's not just about filling the funnel with a bunch of diverse candidates. What's happening in that actual process that's not leading to diverse individuals getting hired? And if we can't solve for that, and if we're not thinking about that as a systemic issue in itself, which it is, then we can't have the people at the table who should be designing the product who can help us better understand how we solve for something. I actually also really appreciate how Cindy brought up that inclusion benefits everyone. And I think a lot of times we think about building something that is inclusive of a certain community, as Jaren mentioned, and we're not thinking about the trickle down effect that can have. I've seen this a lot when looking at certain benefits for policies, particularly around fertility, or thinking that it is specifically to women, or that is specifically to thinking about individuals who can't create families in the traditional way. But ultimately, we have to think about that as an LGBTQ issue, and thinking that LGBTQ families need support and ways of building families that are unique and different. And we need to be thinking about women who might not want to have children right now and have the autonomy to freeze their eggs or think about having children later. So this idea that we have to be thinking about everyone, but not just that, is if we can solve for the most marginalized, why we've seen Black trans women centered so strongly in the Black Lives Matter movement, is because we're thinking about the most marginalized individuals with the biggest barriers. And if we can solve for that, trickling down, we're going to be able to solve for so much more.
Wow. I'm just speechless. I'm getting chills as you guys speak. So I don't know, Sue, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I think the important social obstacle is that knowing our own social location as well, right? A lot of time that, do I have any stigma? Do I have any unconscious bias, like any discrimination, or understand the intersectionality, etc.? So sometimes people don't even know they are having that kind of situations, right? So knowing your own positioning in this society is very important. Knowing your own identity as well, right? And how do you talk to others? How do you interact with others? And have you taken any opportunities to educate or to tell your story to others as well, right? So those are all the opportunities. And other obstacle that I'm seeing is also like a lot of events are actually very time sensitive. So, for example, like the Black Lives Matters that happened last year, right, and AAPI hate crime this year, etc. So sometimes we just have to be patient because things are not going to happen overnight. And all these events actually take villages, not just villages, like villages to actually achieve or make impact. Right. Another thing I saw is that a lot of things that we are doing right now is actually missing that forecasting part of it. So, for example, when we talk about innovation, okay, if people that have mobility issues, let's give them the eye tracking input tools. Okay, then what happened to them after 5-10 years when they're using this eye tracking tool? Is it making their vision worse? Are we taking anything that function right now and make it like not working for them in the next 10-15 years? While we are doing innovations, constantly having that kind of long-term plan to actually track back the impact. So I think that not many company has been doing or have a very robust case studies that tells the story. So sometimes I think, okay, haptic is the answer. Let's go with it. Okay, is that going to impact people's other sensory in the future? Right, so think about those lens and how we can better plan for long-term investment or research, etc.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that you guys are doing at Google? Like, are you trying to go back and follow up on old technology and see how it's affected and how it has worked out for the people it was designed for?
There are a lot of research constantly going on, and then because usually it's like a 5 years in, 6 years in, right? So we haven't had that kind of opportunity to see what the screen reader looks like 25 years ago or something, yeah. Right? So I really look forward to see more company were actually doing that kind of long-term investment and having more case studies out there for others to learn as well.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. No, I really love that example. And since you mentioned stigma and bias, I'm just going to try to circle back there. My question is if you have any concrete examples of how coded bias appears in products and services that we use or that we know, and how we can fight and improve on this issue. Nico's nodding, so I'm just going to pick on you a little.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. So I can give a concrete example, and I think what I like about this example is it shows action steps that we actually took to ensure this doesn't happen at this magnitude again. So maybe some of you have read about when Twitter launched voice tweets, and this happened last summer. And when we tackled this issue of bias, I think humility and transparency are key, because the reality is, as we've mentioned here, we're all going to make mistakes along the way. But what we can do in those moments is what's going to reveal our character and impact trust, and not only trust of our employees, but trust of our customers, our communities, etc. So in the launching of voice tweets, and again, some of you might have already read about this, but last summer, we did not permit closed captioning when we launched voice tweets. So our disabled communities, and particularly our deaf communities, could not use voice tweets. And testing voice tweets helped us realize just how much work we still had to do as a company. And it resulted in us making a commitment to make Twitter more inclusive for disabled communities, actually creating a dedicated team to focus on greater accessibility, tooling, and advocacy across the product. So we ended up creating 2 teams that are active now, and it's the Accessibility Center of Excellence team, which works on inclusivity and accessibility in our office space and marketing communication strategies, and then the Experience Accessibility team, which works with product orgs now and existing features and products. So anything from resources, tools to promote greater accessibility on the services. So these teams now work in tandem to ensure we're held accountable in identifying and fulfilling accessibility gaps through the product developmental cycle. So again, humility, understanding, and awareness that we made a mistake, we missed the mark here. And how are we going to solve for that? How are we going to make sure this doesn't happen at the same magnitude again? Recognizing we are going to make mistakes again, but how can we get the best, the smartest, the greatest experts in the room at the table on the actual side of products from the moment we have an inkling of an idea to the moment of launch, and not just somewhere consulted along the way?
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to add right to that and say that last year this is the second iteration of SparkSummit, right? So on the first one, we also made the mistake of not having live transcription. And it was also, I'm not saying we're not at fault. We're totally at fault. We admitted it, and now we have that. Now we searched and looked for a solution, and we found it. But last year we did a panel on accessibility, and we did not have closed captioning. We did not have live transcript. I know, bad, but we did it. We admitted it, and we worked to make it better. So with that, Cindy, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah. Right now, I'm really I shouldn't say into, but I'm really interested in algorithmic bias and how it's affecting a lot of these algorithms, from everything from healthcare to like policing. They've been around for so long, and we think kind of the situations that you guys provided, those were easy to kind of fix, right? Like, we didn't have transcription last year. We made a mistake. Now we're going to have it. Whereas algorithmic bias is one example that can last generations, right? And have such harmful and devastating impacts, right? Some of the healthcare algorithms that say that people are using to deduce one kind of conclusion is actually really affecting, for example, like Black community, because they're using certain algorithms that say, oh, actually Black people don't need as much healthcare, but they're not looking at all the other kind of things around that to understand that actually, no, Black people need more healthcare. And now what's happening is that Black people are going to doctors and hospitals, and they're getting a lesser diagnosis or not getting the care that they need. And so, there's a documentary on Netflix right now called Coded Bias. It's something that I highly recommend for anybody who hasn't seen it to watch it. And it's one of those kind of really palatable, like, viewing experiences that opens your eyes, and then you're just like, then you see it everywhere. And then you start to like read the stories, and you read about, the man who was mistakenly identified through facial recognition is now in jail. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is an injustice. Right. And so, algorithmic bias, I think, is huge. And there's just so much to it. So I don't want to get into too much details, but
Great. Thank you. Thanks so much. Sue?
Yeah, I think no one builds the product or services with the friction in mind, right? A lot of time it's just the not aware like what's going on in the world, and then not being sensitive enough, right? Or like Jerry was mentioned, right? During the persona stage, that probably didn't include all kinds of potential use cases or dimensions or intersectionality, etc. Right? So there are a lot of things like I would say that constantly, always listen to user feedback. Right, and like Norbert says, not afraid of admitting the mistake that we made, right? And how may we correct it, and how may we actually make the right decision in the future, right? So, for example, since you mentioned the algorithm within our the Google team, right? So even for engineers code, we start doing some like a close lookup to see we using any kind of discrimination words in our code, right? Such as blacklist, whitelist, etc. Right? So we are doing the company revamp to change it to allow list versus deny list, etc. Right? So even to the subtlety of every single language or in our code base, we start seeing a lot of people having the kind of awareness and start doing a lot of changes on that side as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. I love that. Jaren?
Yeah, similar line of thought. So on a more fun side, the other day I told my Google to play Green Light. I said, play the song Green Light, and it started playing a song by Lorde that I never knew existed. And I wanted to hear John Legend, which was a way more popular song, and has one of the greatest rappers of all time on it. But that wasn't like white culture was centered. Lorde, even though it was a less popular song, a less known song, and John Legend, who everyone loves, that wasn't somehow prioritized in the algorithm. And that's just, again, it's a really small thing. And it was funny at the time, but it also is a sign of this kind of larger thing behind it. So again, going with the algorithms, if you look in, again, to maternal health, it's called a VBAC, a vaginal birth after cesarean. embedded in that, there was a calculator to see who was a good candidate for having a vaginal birth after cesarean. And if you took the same person and just marked black versus white, then and had the same sort of statistics and information behind it, then the black would not be a good candidate for this vaginal birth, and the white person would be a good candidate. And there was no real difference behind it. And so there's been work to remove that bias from that. And that's a really good example of that has affected so many millions of people and again has gone across generations. But there's work to be done to find that in all the different examples. And even in school, there was a poll looking at medical students and asking, do Black people feel pain the same way as everyone else? And a lot of them said no. And that's going to be the doctors of the future that are giving out medicine. And that's how you see that show up in the industry as well. One more thing for me is just you originally asked about coded bias. And I think for me, using terms like scale and speed are also small ways of embedding things in, because usually when a large company says that they're going for scale, what they really mean are the scale of able-bodied, cis, educated, middle-class white people between the ages of 25 and 45. Like, it's a scale of a very, very specific person. And so I think, and even in trying to go fast, we really need to launch this product fast. It is harder to do work to make a product accessible. Like, it's harder, it takes more effort, it takes more time. And sometimes we don't do it intentionally, but sometimes just even aiming for scale or for speed, we can be reinforcing the things that we're trying to get out.
Thank you, Jaren, for shedding a light on a very important issue. We have about 10 minutes left, so I would really like to open it up to questions from the audience. And I think I saw one from Nico already. And I think that I had talked to Nico about it briefly, probably at some point before. But so the question is, how can we mitigate the fear of mistakes and normalize that mistakes are part of the process? Like, if someone is trying to be an ally in terms of DEI or trying to do good and trying to help, and they get shut down because they speak from a place of privilege, how can we normalize that mistakes are part of the process? I know it's not an easy question. So, Nico, do you want to go first?
First of all, Nikki, thank you for the question. And I'm curious to hear from my colleagues here as well. I think one of the biggest things when we're learning about how to be an ally, or when we're learning how to mitigate bias in our work, is not relying on a single individual to educate us on that work and for us to do the work ourselves. So, oftentimes as a trans individual, I am seen to have all the answers of the entire trans community, and I'm seen to have to educate everyone on the trans community. And although I've dedicated my life and I'm happy to do that, allyship is being able to find those answers yourself. Google is a great tool, and being able to access that information so that you are being the best person you can be and educating yourself with the most information you can so that you can show up, and not relying on communities that are marginalized to educate you or to tell you when you are wrong. And I recognize that's much easier said than done, and this learning journey continues. And I think we also need to put less pressure on ourselves and being allies of saying we need to get it right every time. I think there's something to be said about being good-ish and recognizing that you're trying to do the best you can, and you're learning as much information as you can, and you're not going to get it right every time. And also having humility when you get it wrong, and not being defensive, and understanding I didn't get it right this time. I'm trying. I'm going to get it right next time. And I know what I'm going to do to get it right next time. Not necessarily I'm going to rely on the marginalized community to teach me how to do better next time. So hopefully that gives a high level, some insight into maybe some next steps there. But I want to open it up to my colleagues as well.
Sue, do you wanna go next?
Yeah, so I think that's actually you're asking this question, you're already taking the first step, right? So a lot of people don't even want to think about it because they're afraid of to touching on that topic. So that's actually a very good gesture, right? And then I also like what Jerry mentioned earlier is that we should stop using number or quantifying the impact, right? Because if we say, oh, okay, I just did this feature, I optimized this feature, so it's working for 20 screen reader users now, right? That's not going to get a good buy-in from others, right? Versus think of the perspective is that it's either make it or break it. What we call like a stress cases, right? Not using like edge cases. Those are just like a minorities that we don't have to worry too much about. Rather, we should think about like, okay, if I don't do this, what did I miss? And how my end users or partner, what kind of experience are they going to have? Right? So it's like, okay, if we don't optimize for screen reader today, 10 years later, we will still have 0 screen reader users on your product, right? So like start thinking about like not just counting how many people you're impacting, but rather what kind of experience what doors are we shutting down for other users?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Cindy, do you want to pile on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, we're all afraid of making mistakes, whether it's about allyship or, anything, right? And so I think part of normalizing it is talking about it and owning it. Nico brought up a lot of great points of like having humility, and understanding that all of this is an ongoing education process. I know I kind of touched on that before, but even those of us that are doing this work, I know that we're constantly learning all the time, right? We can't know experience. And so I make mistakes all the time and I have to apologize and I have to own up to it. And it's also about, I think, understanding where you need to give space and where you need to take space. So, if you make a mistake, that's fine to address it, acknowledge it, but then take your space somewhere else because like, I don't need to hear about it in my safe space, right? I think a lot of what I saw last year, like with Black communities, I would see all these allies kind of like flood our spaces and then share all these resources. And I'm like, I already knew that. Like, that's my life. Like, you don't need to tell me about that. Take that somewhere else. And that's what normalizing is, right? Is like taking it back to your community, taking it back to your bubble. I know I'm in a bubble, but I learn all the time from things. And then I take it back to like my conservative parents to teach them, right? And so I think that's what we need to do that's what normalization is. It's just like own up to it and talk about it. Like, don't be afraid. Like we're all going to make mistakes. I don't care if you're learning how to ride a bike. I don't care if you're learning how to be an ally. It's going to happen.
I love that. I love that.
Plus one to that.
Jared, just one last thought.
Yeah, I can go really quick. I think in general, people are okay with other people making mistakes. Like, we all do it. I think we're used to it. We know how to accommodate for it. I think what happens is sometimes mistakes could have been easily avoided had you done your own work first, or had you. I think the mistakes that get the headlines are when you could have known better and you just didn't. And that happens too. That happens to me too. And you just have to learn from it and do better. But I think the mistakes can be avoided if you're intentional, if you know who you are, what biases you're bringing in, and if you intentionally hire, if you intentionally do co-design, if you intentionally recruit and test, and again, embed those things throughout all the different levels of developing a product or a service, then you can avoid making the mistakes in the first place, or you can catch them when they're smaller and you can just have someone on your team say, hey, we shouldn't do that, rather than, having all of Twitter shame you, which it happens to the best of us.
Happens more often than we care to admit, right? Thank you so much to all 4 of you. I really enjoyed this panel. I really appreciate your time and your thoughts. And yeah, my hats are off. Thank you, and see you at the next panel, which is Insights in Africa and Digital Innovation. See you there. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Bye.